An arrogant stepmother forces the millionaire's daughter to eat in the rain, but she doesn't imagine the father will arrive. He catches everything, and minutes later, does something so unexpected that leaves the stepmother on her knees repentant. She's not able to eat here, Mommy. The drop of sauce, ruby and solitary, landed on the white linen tablecloth with the delicacy of a tear. For any other family, it would have been a trivial accident, a detail forgotten amidst the warmth of a meal. But in that dining room, beneath the imposing glow of a crystal chandelier that reflected the immense wealth of the estate, the ensuing silence was heavy and cutting. Lily, 10 years old and with eyes that still held the sweetness of childhood, held her breath. Her small body tensed in the velvet chair, while the silver fork, too heavy for her hands, trembled discreetly. Across the polished mahogany table, Eleanor, her stepmother, set down her cutlery with surgical precision. There was no anger on her face, only a glacial calm that was far worse. Her lips, painted an impeccable red, curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rules are important, dear Lily," she said, using the soft, melodic voice she reserved for guests. "They teach us the value of things, and this tablecloth, hand-embroidered in Italy, has an inestimable value." Lily dared not look up. She felt her heart beat unevenly, a frantic drum in her chest. She knew what came next. It was a ritual, a macabre dance of discipline and power. Eleanor rose, her elegance turning the simple act into an event. She circled the table and stopped behind the girl, placing her hands on Lily's shoulders. The touch was light, almost affectionate, but the subtle pressure conveyed an unquestionable order. "You haven't finished your dinner yet, and since the carelessness happened here, it wouldn't be fair to further spoil our environment." The logic was perverse, twisted, yet irrefutable to a child who only wanted to please. "You will finish your meal outside. Rain purifies. Isn't that what they say?" Outside, the world dissolved into a curtain of cold water. The autumn afternoon fell grey and melancholic over the perfectly manicured gardens, a testament to her father Richard's sprawling estate. Richard, a man who had turned a modest investment into a colossal fortune, was always absent, traveling to manage his businesses and increase his capital in dollars and euros. He saw the world through profit sheets and the latest Dow Jones quotes, but he did not see what was happening inside his own mansion. Eleanor guided Lily to the glass door that led to the patio. The girl held the porcelain plate with both hands, feeling the heat of the food rapidly fading. The smell of wet earth invaded her nostrils, mixing with the aroma of the roast she would no longer be able to eat. "Only until the last grain of rice is gone," the stepmother whispered, closing the door behind her. The click of the lock sounded like a sentence. Lily took a few hesitant steps, the soaked grass sinking beneath her delicate shoes. The fine rain began to wet her hair, running down her face and mixing with the silent tears she refused to shed. Trembling with cold, she sat on the first stone step of the garden staircase, the plate in her lap. Every raindrop that fell into her food was a fresh humiliation. Inside, the lights were warm and welcoming. Out here, the world was a blur of shadows and water. She only wished her father were there. He would know what to do. He would never allow this. But he was far away, likely closing another multi-million-dollar deal while his only daughter ate in the rain. And from the pantry window, a silver cloth in her hand, Helen, the housekeeper, saw everything. Her heart froze, and fear paralyzed her feet, trapping her as a silent accomplice to the cruelty disguised as a lesson. The night was long and cold, not only from the rain that battered the gardens until dawn, but from the ice that had settled in Lily's bones. Curled up under the down comforter, she trembled uncontrollably, her body alternating between chills and a fever that blurred her thoughts. The punishment ended once the plate was empty, but the humiliation and cold had infiltrated her soul. In the morning, the sun tried to break through the clouds, casting pale rays over the Persian rugs in the hallway. Lily descended the stairs slowly, each step an effort, Her throat scratched and a dry cough escaped her lips. In the dining room, the table was set with the same sterile perfection as always. Eleanor was already seated, reading a financial newspaper, her eyes scanning stock quotes and the appreciation of gold with an interest she never dedicated to her stepdaughter. She looked up when Lily entered, a thin, victorious smile on her face. "Good morning, darling. Did you sleep well?" The question was a knife disguised as affection. Before Lily could answer, the front door opened and Richard's imposing figure filled the room. He was back. The girl's heart leapt with hope. He hugged her, the familiar scent of his expensive cologne and travel enveloping her. "My angel, I came back early. I closed a spectacular deal. Our fund's profitability is going to skyrocket." His eyes shone with success. The man who had built an empire from nothing, whose net worth grew by the second. But then his smile vanished as he touched his daughter's forehead. "You're burning up with fever." What happened? The moment of truth had arrived. Lily opened her mouth. The words caught in her throat, fear and hope locked in a silent duel. She looked at her father, then at her stepmother. Eleanor stepped forward, the concern on her face a work of art in dissimulation. "Oh, Richard, don't even ask. Our little adventurer here decided it would be a great idea to play in the rain yesterday afternoon. I warned her to come inside, but you know how children are, don't you? Full of energy." The lie was delivered with the smoothness of silk, an explanation so plausible that Richard accepted it without hesitation. He turned to Lily, his brow furrowed in affectionate disapproval. "Daughter, you need to take care of yourself. We've talked about this. Now you're sick." Lily's world collapsed. Hope crumbled into dust, replaced by the crushing certainty of her solitude. Her father, the man she loved more than anything, the billionaire who could buy the world, couldn't see the truth inside his own house. He believed her. He believed the woman who deceived him with a smile. Helen, the housekeeper, entered the room to serve coffee, and her eyes met Lily's for a second. The girl saw a flicker of pity, of guilt. But the woman quickly looked away, concentrating on her work. She wouldn't say anything either. Lily was an island, surrounded by a sea of secrets and appearances. Eleanor, sensing victory, placed her hand over Richard's. "Don't worry, my love. I'll take care of her myself. I'll make her tea and ensure she rests." As her father smiled, grateful for his wife's dedication, Lily felt Eleanor's gaze on her. There was no sweetness in it, only a cold, sharp warning, a silent promise that this was only the first battle she had lost. The days that followed were suffocatingly quiet. Lily's fever subsided, but left behind a weariness that weighed more on her soul than on her body. Confined to her room, a sanctuary of pastel shades and toys that no longer brought her joy, she watched the world through the window. Down below, the gardens regained their luster under the sun. But to Lily, everything seemed grey and distant. Eleanor's lie had taken root in the house, and the truth seemed too weak a seed to sprout. During the day, Helen, the housekeeper, brought her meals on a silver tray, always looking down, avoiding eye contact. In her gestures, Lily saw not complicity with her stepmother, but paralyzing fear, the same fear that prevented her from screaming. Helen was just another prisoner in that golden cage. It was on one of those quiet afternoons that resignation gave way to a spark of courage. Lily couldn't speak, for her voice would be muffled by Eleanor's poisonous sweetness. But she could write. Her father, despite being immersed in his universe of business, analyzing his company's cash flow and the profitability of his investments, had one refuge, his library. It was there that he disconnected from the world of assets and liabilities to connect with stories. And there was one book, an old, tattered, leather-bound volume that he read and reread since she was small. It was there that the truth would be safe. With her heart hammering in her chest, she waited for the right moment. Eleanor had gone out for one of her charity luncheons, events where she displayed her elegance and spoke about the importance of family and values. The irony was so cruel, it was absurd. Lily slipped out of her room, her bare feet on the cold marble floor to make no noise. The house was silent, a sleeping giant full of secrets. The library door was ajar. She entered, inhaling the smell of old books and the Cuban cigar her father sometimes smoked while contemplating the growth of his net worth. The room was a monument to his power, floor-to-ceiling shelves, an antique globe, and on the desk, charts showing the rise of his stocks on the exchange. On a small piece of paper from her drawing pad, with the still uncertain handwriting of childhood, she wrote, "It wasn't an accusation, but an appeal. Daddy, the rain wasn't a game. I was being punished for staining the tablecloth. I am sorry. Love, Lily." They were simple, bare words, stripped of any anger, only the truth. She found the book, the pages yellowed by time, and hid the folded note between the chapters he liked best. It was a small time bomb of hope, planted in the heart of her father's sanctuary. Back in her room, the wait began. Every creak in the house, every car passing on the street made her hold her breath. The afternoon dragged into night. She heard Eleanor's car arrive, followed by the stepmother's soft voice greeting the staff. Later, she heard her father's heavy, familiar footsteps in the hallway. He was home. Lily sat motionless on the bed, her ears straining. The night silence was dense. Then, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of the library door opening. Her heart leapt. It was him. He would find the note. The truth would finally come to light. The agony of waiting was almost unbearable. Minutes that felt like hours passed. Suddenly, footsteps sounded in the hallway again, quicker, more decisive. They stopped, not in front of the library, but in front of her bedroom door. The handle began to turn slowly. The door opened with a whisper, not with her father's comforting, hurried presence, but with Eleanor's calculated elegance. She entered the room and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing like the closing of a trap. In her hand, she held a small folded piece of paper. The note. Lily's heart dropped, an ice stone in her stomach. The air seemed to grow denser, harder to breathe. Hope, which moments before had been a living flame, was extinguished all at once, leaving only a smoke of panic and despair. Eleanor did not look angry. Her face maintained the same plastic serenity as always. She approached the bed, the fabric of her silk dress brushing the rug without a sound. "I was arranging some reports on treasury bonds on your father's desk," she said, her voice calm, almost didactic. "He easily distracts himself with his books when he should be focused on increasing our fortune. I imagined he might have forgotten something important in there." She unfolded the note with her fingertips, as if touching something dirty. She read Lily's words aloud, each syllable laden with subtle contempt. The rain wasn't a game. When she finished, she raised her eyes to the girl. "Lily, Lily, do you really think your father, a man who deals with millions, who has the responsibility of managing so many assets and properties, needs to be bothered with these childish fantasies?" Without waiting for an answer, she tore the paper once, twice, and then again, transforming the girl's words of hope into useless confetti, which she dropped delicately into the small wastebasket beside the bed. The act was so final, so absolute, that Lily felt as if a part of her had been destroyed with it. Then, something unexpected happened. Eleanor's face softened, and from a hidden pocket in her dress, she took out a small object that shone under the lamplight. It was a delicate gold necklace with a small cameo pendant. Lily recognized it instantly. It belonged to her mother. She had seen it in old photos, a treasure from a time she could barely remember. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and took Lily's hand, which was cold as marble. "I know it's been difficult for you," she said, her voice now full of fake tenderness. I also lost my mother when I was young. I know what it's like to feel alone." She opened the clasp of the necklace and placed it around Lily's neck. The cold metal touched the girl's skin, a strange contrast to the warmth of the humiliation she still felt. "Your father gave this to me. He said I should give it to you when I felt the time was right, when we finally became a real family." She stroked Lily's hair, a gesture meant to be consoling, but which felt like marking territory. "Now we are a family, Lily. And in a family, we protect each other. We don't tell stories that might worry others unnecessarily. Do you understand? I take care of you, and you trust me." Lily was speechless, the weight of the necklace on her chest as confusing as the words. Was it a gift of love, or a golden muzzle, an inheritance, or the price of her silence? The bedroom door opened suddenly, and her father entered, his face radiant. "Still awake, my angel." "I was in the library analyzing the performance of some crypto holdings and lost track of time." He then noticed the necklace. His eyes filled with tears. "Eleanor, you gave it to her. Oh, my love, you don't know how happy this makes me." He approached and kissed his wife's forehead, looking at Lily with an emotional smile. "See, daughter, didn't I tell you she would take good care of you? Now you too have something special. A connection." The necklace was an icy weight against Lily's skin. For 2 days, she felt its outline under the collar of her pajamas and dresses, a constant and confusing reminder. That object, which should have been a symbol of the purest love she had ever known, had been turned into a tool of manipulation. It was an invisible chain, a gift that shackled her to silence. Eleanor, in turn, played her role perfectly. She treated Lily with exemplary sweetness in front of Richard, asking about her day, praising her drawings, creating the illusion of a happy, harmonious home. But when they were alone, her eyes conveyed a clear message. "We have a secret, and you won't break it." The mansion, with its wide hallways and high ceilings, had never seemed so claustrophobic. Every art object, every designer piece of furniture seemed a witness to her silent imprisonment. On the morning of the 3rd day, Richard came down for breakfast with the energy of a hurricane. His cell phone pressed against his ear. "Yes, the closing will be in Zurich. The dividends from this operation will secure our next major investment in clean technology. Prep the jet." He hung up and smiled at his family, a smile worth $1 billion. "Darlings, I'll have to make a quick trip. 2 days, tops. It's a business opportunity I can't miss. It will increase our capital in ways you can't imagine." He kissed Lily's forehead, a quick, distracted gesture. "Behave, my angel. Listen to Eleanor. She knows what's best for you." The door closed, and with it, Lily's last shred of hope was gone. The silence that settled in the dining room was different. It was the silence of Eleanor's absolute power. The stepmother took a sip of her green juice, observing the girl over the rim of the crystal glass. In that instant, a wave of panic and courage crashed inside Lily. She couldn't wait. 2 days under Eleanor's watchful eye would be an eternity. She needed to try, just one more time. "Excuse me, I think I forgot my math book in the office," she lied, her voice a trembling thread. Eleanor merely nodded, an enigmatic smile on her lips. Richard's office was another world, a place where profitability charts and stock market quotes replaced family photos. There was an old-fashioned corded telephone on the desk, a model rarely used. With trembling hands, Lily dialed her father's cell phone number, which she knew by heart. Every ring of the call was a beat of her heart. 1, 2, 3. "Hello, Lily?" His voice sounded distant, muffled by what seemed to be airport noise. "Daddy," she whispered, relief making her voice fail. "Daddy, I need to..." But she couldn't finish. The line went dead, a sudden total silence. She pressed the phone to her ear, but there was nothing. Then she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her delicate hand resting on the switch for the internet router and the phone line on the wall. With a smooth movement, she flipped the switch, and a small green light came back on the device. "How strange," she said, her voice overflowing with false concern. "I think we had a signal drop. These modern systems are so unstable. It's a shame. You almost got to talk to him." She approached, took the receiver from Lily's paralyzed hand, and placed it back on the hook with frightening precision. Her smile had vanished, and in its place was a coldness that froze the air. "Real families keep secrets, Lily," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "I thought you understood the value of our little arrangement. It seems we'll need a more memorable lesson." Eleanor's memorable lesson arrived 2 days later, under the shine of the same crystal chandeliers that had witnessed Lily's first humiliation. Richard was still in Zurich, closing that deal that promised astronomical profits. In his absence, Eleanor had organized a dinner. It wasn't a party, but a strategic event, a demonstration of power. The guests were her husband's partners, men and women who spoke in figures, whose conversations floated between stock market quotations, the surprising rise of a new cryptocurrency, and US Treasury yields. These were people for whom the word net worth was a verb, not a noun. Lily was instructed to wear her best blue velvet dress and sit at the table, a small human bibelot in her stepmother's showcase of perfection. She barely touched the food, fear forming a knot in her stomach. Every movement of her fork was measured, every sip of water a risky maneuver. She struggled to be invisible, to merge with the tapestry of the wall. The night progressed, and Eleanor shone. She was the perfect hostess, charming and intelligent, discoursing on investments and art with equal ease, solidifying her image as the ideal wife for a multimillionaire. At one point, one of the guests, an elderly man with kind eyes, turned to Lily. "And you, young lady, you're very quiet. What do you intend to be when you grow up and inherit all this fortune?" The question was innocent, but in the silence that followed, it felt like a grenade. Lily felt all eyes turn to her. She swallowed hard. I'd like to be a veterinarian," she whispered. The man smiled. "A kind soul. Your mother certainly would be proud." The mention of her mother hung in the air. It was the trigger. Eleanor set down her wineglass. The sound of the crystal against the linen tablecloth was the only noise in the room. Her face twisted into a mask of deep sadness and disappointment. "Ah, Albert, you are very kind. But unfortunately, Lily broke the most important rule of our house tonight." The change in atmosphere was instantaneous. Curiosity replaced cordiality on the guests' faces. "What rule, my dear?" asked the man's wife, visibly uncomfortable. Eleanor stood up, drama in every gesture. "The rule of respect. She openly disobeyed me before dinner, an act of defiance I cannot ignore, not if I want to raise her to be a woman of value." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that Lily was paralyzed, unable to draw breath to defend herself. "I know it seems harsh," the stepmother continued, her voice choked with manufactured emotion, "but discipline is the greatest proof of love. And since she refuses to share bread with us in harmony, she will have to learn the value of solitude." She turned to Lily, her eyes cold as ice. "Take your plate. You will finish your dinner outside." Outside. The rain had begun to fall again, a fine, persistent drizzle that beat against the windows. The nightmare was repeating itself, but this time there was an audience. Trembling under the shocked and complicit gaze of the guests, Lily stood up. Her legs barely supported her. She picked up the plate, the humiliation burning her face like a fever. She walked past the table, past the faces that avoided her gaze, and headed toward the glass door. Helen, the housekeeper, stood at the kitchen entrance, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Her eyes met Lily's, full of impotent pain. The door closed behind the girl, muffling the awkward silence she left behind. Alone on the patio, The rain began to soak her velvet dress, and she knelt on the cold stone floor, the untouched plate in her trembling hands. The rain was no longer just water. It was a liquid curtain separating her from the world. The blue velvet of her dress, now heavy and dark, clung to her skin, stealing what little warmth her body still produced. Hot tears mixed with the cold drops on her face, but she could no longer distinguish one from the other. It was just a sensation of dampness and despair. The porcelain plate in her hands trembled, and the risotto on it turned into a watery grey paste. Kneeling on the stone floor, she was the image of desolation. She vaguely heard the sound of an engine, a soft, powerful rumble cutting through the rain noise. A luxury car, silent like a predator, slid along the long gravel driveway and stopped in front of the main steps. The cold, bright LED headlights swept the garden and illuminated her for an instant, turning her into a tragic statue in the storm. She closed her eyes, hoping the figure who emerged from the car was just another late guest who would ignore her. But the door didn't open immediately. Inside, Richard shut off the engine. The trip to Zurich had been a resounding success. The new applications he had secured would generate profitability that exceeded all projections. The compounding interest on his capital would make his fortune grow exponentially. He was building not just an empire, but a dynasty, a solid inheritance for Lily. A tired but satisfied smile touched his lips. He could barely wait to tell Eleanor and see the pride in her eyes. Before getting out, he looked at his house. The dining room lights glowed, warm and inviting. A perfect home. It was then that he saw her, a small blue stain in the darkness of the patio. He frowned, his eyes straining to understand the image, a child, kneeling in the rain with a plate in her hands. His brain took a second to process the information, to connect that drenched, miserable figure to his daughter, Lily. The smile on his face dissolved, replaced by a mask of disbelief. For an instant, Eleanor's lie echoed in his mind. She played in the rain alone, but this was not play. This was punishment. It was torture. And through the window, he could see the silhouette of his wife, standing talking to guests while his daughter was outside in the cold. The initial shock gave way to a terrible clarity. The fever, the note he never saw, the interrupted call, every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with brutal precision, revealing an image of cruelty he had refused to see. The air in his lungs seemed to freeze. The fortune, the businesses, the billions in assets and net worth, everything became insignificant, a pile of ashes before that scene. He, the man who prided himself on his instinct for investments and his ability to detect any deceit in the business world, had been blind inside his own home. The pain that struck him was not explosive rage, but a cold, silent, and deep fury. A fury against Eleanor for her malice, but mainly against himself, for his negligence, for his stupidity. He got out of the car, the rain beating on his expensive suit without him noticing. His movements were slow, deliberate. He did not run to his daughter. First, he needed to enter the lair of the lie. He walked toward the front door, each step echoing the heavy beat of his guilty heart. The man who had left as a triumphant billionaire returned as a broken father, and, as he touched the cold bronze doorknob, he made a silent promise. Justice, that night, would come at a very high price. The heavy oak door opened without warning, gently hitting the marble doorframe. The sound, though discreet, was enough to cut through the conversation about the profitability of hedge funds and the volatility of Bitcoin. A sudden, dense silence fell over the dining room. All eyes turned. Richard stood in the entrance, rain streaming from his overcoat and forming a small puddle on the Aubusson rug. His face was devoid of emotion, a terrifying calm that was infinitely more frightening than any burst of anger. His eyes, however, burned with an icy fury that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. Eleanor was the first to recover from the shock. She stood up with a trembling smile, the perfect hostess desperately trying to mend the reality that was breaking. "Richard, my love, what a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Your deal was a success. I imagine." She walked toward him, ready to hug him, to wrap him in her web of lies. He took a step to the side, a subtle, devastating movement that left her standing halfway, arms in the air. His gaze was not on her. It was fixed on the glass door leading to the patio, where the silhouette of his daughter was still visible against the rainy night. "Where is my daughter?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, each word falling like an ice shard. The question hung in the air, a direct challenge. Eleanor tried to laugh, a sharp, joyless sound. "Richard, let's not spoil the evening." Lily was a little stubborn. "It's just a small lesson in discipline. You know how important it is for character." She sought the support of the guests with her eyes, but they were glued to their plates, suddenly fascinated by the porcelain pattern. No one would dare intervene in the fall of an empire. Richard walked slowly to the center of the room, his wet shoes leaving a dark trail on the light rug. He stopped in front of his wife. "The same lesson that left her with a fever last week?" he asked, and the mention of the fact showed Eleanor that the game had changed. Panic flickered in her eyes. She resorted to her most powerful weapon, tears. "How can you think this of me?" she sobbed, hand on her chest. "I love her as if she were my own. But she disrespected me in front of everyone. What was I supposed to do? Let her grow up without limits, only to one day ruin the inheritance and the name you worked so hard to build?" At that moment, the kitchen door opened. It was Helen, the housekeeper. In her arms, wrapped in a tablecloth, was Lily, trembling uncontrollably, her lips blue with cold. The sight of the child, so fragile and broken, was a more powerful accusation than any word. Richard rushed to her, knelt, and wrapped her in his arms, feeling the small, icy body against his. He held her tightly, his heart breaking into a million pieces. Eleanor, seeing her narrative collapse, attempted one last desperate act. "Look what you've done, Lily!" she screamed, her voice now shrill. "You worried your father with your lies." Lily shrank into her father's arms. She said nothing. She only raised her trembling hand and, with hesitant fingers, touched the small cameo necklace that was still around her neck, the symbol of the lie, the price of her silence. Richard's gaze followed the gesture. He saw the necklace, the same one that had belonged to his late wife, the jewel he had given Eleanor as a test of her goodness, and in an instant of terrible clarity, he understood everything. The gift was not a gesture of love, it was a muzzle. Lily's touch on the necklace was a silent trigger, a piece of evidence that spoke louder than any scream. Richard looked from the cameo to his daughter's terrified eyes, and then to Eleanor, whose face, previously a mask of false sorrow, now contorted in real panic. The truth revealed itself, not as a flash, but as the slow, inexorable rise of the tide, drowning all the lies he had accepted so easily. The luxurious hall, designed to impress and display the power of his wealth, transformed into a courtroom. The guests, previously business partners and social accomplices, were now the jury, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and morbid fascination. No one moved, no one breathed. The tension was a steel wire stretched to the maximum. "The necklace," whispered Richard, his voice hoarse with guilt and rage. "I told you to give it to her when you felt you loved her, when you were a family." Eleanor took a step back, her hand instinctively going to her own throat. But we are a family. I love her, Richard. This was just a misunderstanding, an error in judgment." Her words sounded hollow, desperate. Richard's gaze shifted from her and settled on Helen. The housekeeper, who was still near the door with Lily in her arms, was visibly shaking, For months, she had lived on a razor's edge between loyalty to her job, the source of her livelihood, the security of her own family, and the protection of an innocent child. Fear had kept her silent, but the look Richard gave her was not an order, it was an appeal, a plea for help from a man who had finally awakened to the nightmare in his own home. And in Lily's eyes, she saw not an accusation, but a silent plea. That small point of courage, which the girl had guarded amid so much pain, lit a flame inside Helen. Enough fear, enough silence. With a trembling but firm voice, she stepped forward. It was not a misunderstanding. "Sir," she said, the words breaking the tension like thunder. "I saw that first time when the child got sick. Mrs. Eleanor forced her to eat in the rain because she stained the tablecloth." She paused, taking a deep breath, the weight of months of secrecy finally being released. "And the note. The girl wrote a note for you. Mrs. Eleanor found it and destroyed it. She gave the necklace to the girl that same night. To buy her silence." The confession fell upon the room with the weight of a sentence. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Eleanor's pretense. The guests' embarrassment turned into visible shock. The hypocrisy, so carefully veiled under layers of Italian linen and conversations about the stock market, was now naked and raw, exposed under the light of the chandeliers. Eleanor looked from Helen to Richard, her face pale, her mouth open in a gasp of horror. The mask had fallen. There was nowhere left to run. The man she had manipulated, the billionaire whose net worth she coveted, now saw her for who she truly was. And in his eyes, there was no room for forgiveness. There was only the icy void of a final and irrevocable decision. The queen had been dethroned in her own castle, and the walls that witnessed her power now echoed her downfall. Helen's confession hung in the air, dense and irrefutable. The words, spoken with the simplicity of truth, stripped Eleanor of her last defense. She looked around, seeking a friendly face, a sign of doubt, but found only the reflection of her own ruin in the shocked eyes of the guests. The social empire she had built with such care, using Richard's capital and prestige as its foundation, crumbled in real time. In one final, pathetic act of denial, she turned to her husband, hands outstretched in supplication. "Richard, please." It's her word against mine, a resentful employee. Are you going to throw away everything we built, our whole life, our wealth, because of a fantasy? Richard didn't even blink. He looked at the woman before him and saw not the elegant companion who accompanied him to business dinners, but a stranger, a predator he had invited into his home. All his skill in assessing risk, in analyzing a company's cash flow, or the profitability of an investment fund, had failed spectacularly in the most important application of his life, the safety of his daughter. Guilt hit him with the force of a punch, a sharp and deserved pain. "We built nothing, Eleanor," he said, his voice so devoid of emotion that it cut deeper than any scream. "I built an asset base. You built a lie upon it." He stood up, still holding Lily protectively in his arms. The girl nestled against his chest, finally safe. Richard's gaze swept the room, passing over each of the guests, who now seemed to have shrunk in their seats. "I apologize to everyone for this evening. Clearly, there has been a terrible error in my judgment. The reception is over." It was a dismissal, not an apology, a clear order for the witnesses of his humiliation to withdraw. Then he turned to Eleanor, and for the first time, she saw the depth of the fury behind his calm. "Our marriage is over. My attorneys will contact you tomorrow to discuss the terms of the asset separation. Now, I want you out of my house." Eleanor staggered, as if physically struck. "Out! Now! But it's raining. Where will I go?" Richard took a step toward the large front door, Lily's hand firmly in his. He opened the door, and the sound of rain and the smell of wet earth flooded the entrance hall. The cold wind made the candle flames on the dining table flicker. "Exactly," he said, his voice icy, He did not push her, he did not drag her, he simply stood there holding the door open, the cruelest and most definitive invitation he could make. Humiliated, defeated, stripped of everything, Eleanor walked out like a sleepwalker. Her haute couture dress, the symbol of her status, now looked like a ridiculous costume. As she passed her husband, she shot him a look of pure hatred, but he did not flinch. She stepped out into the darkness, and the rain immediately began to soak her perfectly styled hair. Richard closed the door. The click of the lock was final, a period at the end of a dark chapter in their lives. He knelt down and looked at Lily, expecting to see relief, perhaps even a smile. But the girl pulled away from his hand and ran to the glass window next to the door. Outside, Eleanor stood at the entrance, a pathetic and lonely figure in the storm, and on Lily's face there was neither triumph nor vengeance. There was only a deep and incomprehensible tenderness. Lily's gesture, that unexpected demonstration of tenderness towards her tormentor, was a deeper blow to Richard than all the humiliation of that night. He expected to see the relief of justice in her, the satisfaction of victory, but in her eyes there was none of that. There was only pure, disarming compassion, an empathy that he, the father, the protector, had failed to feel. He realized, with painful clarity, that while he focused on building an inheritance of assets and capital, his daughter was cultivating a richness of spirit that he could barely comprehend. The sound of hurried footsteps and embarrassed coughs pulled him from his stupor. The guests, previously so eager to share his success and net worth, now fled the scene of his personal failure. They grabbed their coats and bags in silence, avoiding his gaze, anxious to return to the security of their own worlds, where problems were solved with fund transfers and risk analysis, not broken hearts. In a few minutes, the mansion was empty. The silence that remained was vast and heavy, filled only by the sound of the rain and the ticking of a grandfather clock, marking the start of a new, uncertain time. Helen, the housekeeper, approached hesitantly, her eyes red with contained emotion. "Mr. Richard, He turned to her, the gratitude on his face immense. "Helen, there are no words to thank you for what you did, your courage." He paused, swallowing his guilt. "Your job has never been more secure. This house owes you more than any salary could ever repay." The tears Helen had held back finally rolled, tears of relief and newly claimed dignity. She merely nodded and, with one last affectionate look at Lily, discreetly withdrew, leaving father and daughter alone. Richard grabbed a cashmere throw from the sofa and wrapped Lily in it, sitting next to her and pulling her close. Her body still trembled, but now it was more from shock than from cold. He looked around the room at the expensive paintings, the designer furniture, the symbols of a life of profit and success. Everything seemed fake, an empty shell. He, the multimillionaire who understood interest, dividends, and the complex architecture of the stock market, had proven utterly ignorant in the simplest application: paternal love. "Lily," he began, his voice choked, "there is no excuse for what I allowed to happen. I was so blind with my work, with increasing our fortune, with securing your future, that I forgot to take care of your present." He looked into her eyes, forcing himself to face the pain he had permitted. "I failed you, my angel. I failed in a way no business failure could ever compare. Can you forgive me?" Lily didn't answer with words. She only turned in his lap and hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest. It was the absolution he didn't deserve, but which she gave him freely. Richard hugged her back, silently weeping for the first time in decades, feeling the weight of his empire of dollars and euros dissolve in the simplicity of that embrace. For a long time, they stayed like that, the sound of their hearts overlapping the storm outside. The rain began to subside, and a fragile calm settled in the house. When Lily finally pulled back slightly, she looked at him with a seriousness that broke his heart. Her eyes, wide and clear, held one last, terrible doubt. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small in the room's silence. "Are you going to travel again?" Lily's question, so simple and direct, hung in the mansion's silence with the weight of an anvil. "Are you going to travel again?" It wasn't a question about logistics or business. It was a question about the future, about security, about the fear of loneliness returning to her door. Richard felt the impact of those words in every fiber of his being. An easy answer, a "no, my angel, never again," would be a lie. The business world he had built was a complex machine, a monster of investments and responsibilities that couldn't simply be switched off. But at the same time, a "yes, but it will be different" would sound like the same empty promise he had made so many times before. Trust, once broken so violently, couldn't be mended with mere words. It needed proof, an irrefutable act of faith. He stood up slowly, his heart heavy with the decision forming in his mind. He walked to his leather briefcase, which he had dropped near the door when he arrived. He opened it and took out his cell phone. The small rectangle of glass and metal that was his constant connection to the empire of wealth that had almost cost him his soul. It was the portal to stock market charts, crypto quotes, to the conference calls that decided the fate of millions of dollars. To Lily, that object was the symbol of his absence. Under the attentive, fearful gaze of his daughter, he dialed a number. The call was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Richard? Is something wrong?" Was the flight back moved up? It was the voice of Mark, his right-hand man, the man who managed his schedule and in many ways his life. "Mark, listen carefully," Richard said, his voice firm and clear. "Cancel all my meetings for the next few weeks, all of them." On the other end of the line, there was a shocked silence. "Sir, but what about the board meeting in Singapore and the closing of the investment fund in London? Your net worth?" "Delegate it," Richard interrupted, the words sounding like a final command. "Delegate everything? Promote whoever you have to promote? Hire whoever you have to hire? My only asset that matters is here, with me, and it's at risk. The rest is just money. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Understood," Mark replied, his voice now filled with a respect that went beyond professional. Richard hung up the phone and placed it on the coffee table with a deliberate gesture, as if disposing of a great weight. He turned to Lily, whose eyes were wide, no longer with fear, but with hopeful incredulity. He knelt before her again, meeting her height. "My priority, Lily, from this exact moment forward, is you. I spent years accumulating a fortune that almost made me lose my only true treasure. That ends today." The tears that sprang to Lily's eyes this time were not of sadness or fear. They were of relief. A small, trembling smile, the first in many days, began to form on her lips. She threw herself into his arms, and the hug that followed was not one of two people consoling each other, but of two souls reuniting. The past, with all its pain, was finally beginning to dissolve. After a long moment, she pulled back a little, her face still tear-stained, but her eyes shining with a new light. The urgent question had been answered. Now a new one arose, full of possibilities. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice full of a childlike curiosity he hadn't heard in a long time. "What are we going to do tomorrow?" Lily's question, "What are we going to do tomorrow?" echoed in Richard's mind throughout the night. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in an armchair in his daughter's room, watching her sleep, her face finally serene, free from the shadows of fear. For the first time in years, he didn't think about stock market quotes, cash flow, or the profitability of his investments. He thought about pancakes, about trips to the park, about how to recover the time his capital couldn't buy back. Tomorrow arrived with the first, shy golden rays of sun breaking through the windows. The mansion was silent, but it was a different silence, a silence of peace, not of tension. When Lily came downstairs, she didn't find the table formally set. Instead, she found her father in the kitchen, wearing an apron over his expensive shirt, with a smear of flour on his cheek. He was clumsy, looking at a recipe on his tablet as if it were a complex report on liabilities and assets. A bowl was messy with batter, and in the frying pan, a misshapen, slightly burnt form sizzled. He smiled at her, a genuine and slightly embarrassed smile. "Good morning, my angel. I was trying to answer your question." Lily looked at the scene, at the mess on the impeccable marble countertop, and a bubbling laugh escaped her lips. It was the first time Richard had heard her laugh like that in over a year. The sound was the best melody he had ever heard, more valuable than all the gold stored in his vaults. She rushed to his side, grabbed a spoon, and started to help. Together, they made the ugliest and most delicious pancake in the world. They ate right there, sitting on the tall counter stools, their feet swinging, ignoring the dining room that now seemed like a mausoleum of a past that no longer belonged to them. During breakfast, Richard's phone rang. The name of his lead attorney flashed on the screen. He looked at the device, then at Lily, who stopped eating, apprehension returning to her eyes. With a calm movement, he rejected the call. "They're handling the asset division," he said simply. "It's not something we need to worry about. Our real net worth is right here." Helen entered the kitchen, expecting to receive the day's orders, but stopped, surprised by the scene. Richard turned to her, the smile still on his face. "Helen, as of today, you are no longer the housekeeper. You are the manager of this household. Your first task is to make a list of everything that reminds us of the last few months. Curtains, rugs, the dining table. We're donating it all. This house needs a new soul." He paused and added, his voice full of deep gratitude, "And I've instructed my advisors to create an educational trust fund for your children. Consider it a small dividend for your honesty." Helen's tears were of pure joy. It was justice manifesting not as punishment, but as reward. Later, father and daughter walked through the garden, now bathed in sunlight. Lily held his hand tightly, and for the first time, there was no fear in her touch. He had cancelled the trips, silenced the businesses, and was right there, entirely present. The wound still existed, but the healing process had begun, fueled by burnt pancakes and fulfilled promises. The main conflict was resolved not with a bang, but with the whisper of a new routine. And as they watched a butterfly land on a rose, Richard understood that the true inheritance he would leave his daughter would not be measured in dollars or euros, but in the countless tomorrows they would now have together. The days turned into weeks, and the mansion, once a stage of silence and fear, began to breathe again. The heavy drapes were replaced by light fabrics that danced with the breeze, and the imposing mahogany dining table was replaced by a round, light wood table, where meals were no longer a test of etiquette, but a celebration of companionship. Richard kept his promise. He did not travel. His business empire, which once demanded his constant presence, learned to function with his generals. He discovered that the world didn't stop if he wasn't in a boardroom. His company stocks continued to rise, dividends were still deposited, but the obsession that chained him had dissipated. He was still a billionaire, but his definition of wealth had irreversibly changed. His new business was relearning how to be a father. He learned the names of all Lily's dolls, watched all her favorite animated movies, and even ventured to build a blanket fort in the living room, a structure far more complex and rewarding than any skyscraper he had ever financed. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, he tried to explain to Lily, in simple terms, what his job was. "I used to spend all day looking at charts, my angel," he said, "trying to guess if the value of something, like gold or a cryptocurrency, was going to go up or down. It was a game to see who accumulated the most points, and the points were money." Lily listened attentively, her feet swinging in the grass. "And did you win the game, Daddy?" Richard smiled, a melancholic but sincere smile. "I thought I had won, daughter. I accumulated a great fortune, a net worth that seemed endless. But while I was counting my points, I was losing the most important game of all, right here at home. I discovered that the true profit doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. It shows up in a smile like yours. That afternoon, the sky began to darken, clouds gathering on the horizon. The smell of wet earth filled the air, the same scent that once announced terror for Lily. Distant thunder resonated. Lily looked at her father, and for an instant, a shadow of memory passed through her eyes. Richard felt it. He took her hand, his touch firm and secure. "Come on," he said softly. "I want to show you something." He led her not into the house for shelter, but onto the stone patio, the very place where she had been forced to kneel. The first raindrops began to fall, thick and warm, typical of a summer thunderstorm. The rain beat on the roof, creating a soft, constant melody. But this time, no one was outside suffering. They were together, watching the curtain of water that seemed to wash the world. Richard extended his hand, palm up, feeling the cold drops. Lily, seeing the peace on his face, hesitated for a second and then did the same. The water ran down her small fingers. Then she laughed, a clear, free, loud laugh. Richard laughed with her. The pain of the past, the memory of the humiliation, was being washed away, purified by the same rain that had once been a weapon of cruelty. The mansion's luxury was still there, but now it was just a backdrop. The true treasure was that moment, the peace rediscovered, the sound of their laughter mixing with the storm. The home, finally, was whole.